What is the most unexplainable thing that ever happened to you? For about a week before my apartment burned down, I dreamed every night about various houses burning down. Not totally unexplainable, and can just call it coincidence if you don't believe in sorcery. When I was in kindergarten or maybe first grade, we had a blackout at my school. And this kid goes, "Wait. I'll light a match," and proceeded to pretend to light an invisible match, and the lights came back on. And we cheered for him. Then he said, "Oh, it's too hot." And he blew it out. Then the lights went back out. Wizardry. Deleted. I guess it was a coincidence. But when I was little, I used to go outside in the mornings to pet a cat that lived under my home. I used to play with her every day. One night I had a dream that she died, so I woke up distraught. Went out to our usual place. And I called out for her. She never came out, and I never saw her again since the dream. I was outside talking to my neighbor. Suddenly it was like someone accidentally flicked the lights off and then back on. It was dark in the middle of the day as far as I could see for just a split second. I thought it was just my brain, but then I saw my neighbor looked confused as well. Then her daughter said, "What just happened?" Quote, "We all were looking in opposite directions, so it was just suddenly dark everywhere. We still talk about it sometimes. No idea what it was. I've spent hours on the internet trying to find answers with no success." Person shrugging, medium light skin tone. I was at home with my mom. Nobody else. There were only two entrances. One at the front, where I was sitting nearby, and one at the back of the house. And it directly went to the kitchen where my mom was. And then I heard clearly my dad's voice calling. Sounded like from the living room. He was working at the time. But I came to the living room anyway and found my mom there. She asked me, "Did you hear that too?" Quote, "Nobody was there. When he came home, we asked him. But of course he said it was not him. At first I thought he lied. My dad really loved to prank us. But then there was no way he sneaked silently without me and my mom not knowing it. That time I fell into a glass door and the only thing that broke was the keys in my pocket. I was walking to my friend's house one summer. Maybe 10 or 11 years old. Anyways, sunny day. Couple clouds, but otherwise it's bright out. Perfect visibility. When a perfectly rectangular shadow comes up from the direction behind me on the ground. Maybe 15 feet by 30 feet in size. Traveling just faster than a car probably would be, and goes over top of me. I'm looking at the shape on the ground as it goes over. And when I do look up to the sky, I don't see anything that could have possibly cast it. Even the clouds were just trailing little wisps. I looked back down and it was going over some houses. And then it was gone forever. So yeah. Weirdest thing was a mystery rectangle shadow. Was home alone with my sister, who was about 3 at the time. She's sleeping in my room and I walk out to go to the bathroom. No one else is in the house, but as I'm in there handling business, I start hearing the chairs moving. In the kitchen. I come out of the restroom and look to my left, where I find the dining table chair moved and placed. Perfectly staring down the hallway. Go back to check on my sister and she's still sleeping. Walk around the house to see if my parents were home and nothing. Doors and windows were shut. No way wind could have pushed this chair 5 feet and turned it to face down the hall. During this time I was constantly being woken up at 3 a.m. almost every night and felt a cold hand placed on my left pec over my heart. Spooky shit. Walked from my bedroom down the hallway to the kitchen. Stepped through the doorway just as a ball of lightning arced across the room. I blinked and was back in my bedroom without passing the space in between. Crept back up the hall and saw my housemate standing in the kitchen. Mouth opening and closing because he had no idea what had happened either. Turns out he'd clamped the power cable for the sandwich press between the hot plates and burnt through it. Thus the lightning. Doesn't explain how I teleported from one end of the house to the other. Fell asleep watching the original Pet Sematary. Dreamt my cat was hit by a car. Woke up to my dad telling me she had just been hit. And we needed to take care of her, because she was suffering. I didn't personally witness this. But at the time my family was sufficiently freaked out by it and it was talked about a lot. One morning, my autistic brother went into my parents' room at like 3 a.m. He woke them up to tell them that his grandmother was very old and was going to die. They got a call later that day that she indeed died in her sleep that night. But he's autistic and significantly disabled. So it's not like we could just ask him how he knew that or why he said it. He did a lot of other weird psychic shit over the years. But that was the spookiest one. When I was about 10 years old I woke up and had no recollection of the day before. I told my little brother and he said he had the same problem. I however didn't believe him because he was 8 and thought it was funny where I was mildly concerned. I think he thought it was a game and we were playing some pretend game. This of course made my folks think it was a game and no one took me seriously. All I wanted was for someone to tell me something about yesterday to jog my memory but no one did. Still have no idea what happened. That was over 30 years ago and I'm the only one who remembers not remembering. I drive down the same road every day to get into town and on the horizon are the Chiltern Hills. I grew up on and around them so know them well and the surrounding area. One day there was a rainbow as I drove down that road and through it rather than seeing the familiar greens and chalk of the hills I was used to. I swear I saw a vast industrial complex. It was huge with multiple dark buildings and chimneys belching out smoke. It lasted as long as the rainbow was there and could only be seen through it. There are no buildings like that for many miles around or ever have been as far as I'm aware. One night, I was having stomachache cramps and they were really bad. I was rocking back and forth and then comes my kitten. Looks at me and jumps on my lap. Goes to my stomachache and starts purring really hard. I just sat there wondering, what is he doing? And when he stopped purring, he just sat in my lap and my cramps were starting to leave. That was the most weirdest and coolest thing that ever happened to me. Miss my cat. I got T-boned by an 18-wheeler at over 50 miles an hour and I walked away without a scratch. Whenever I was about 11 my family moved into a townhouse that we only lived in for maybe about half a year. One day I walked up the stairs to go to my room and as I turned the corner to the hallway I saw a mirror image of myself staring me directly in my eyes before disappearing after a second or two. I don't know if I believe in supernatural stuff or not. But it certainly felt real. I'm not saying it wasn't just my mind playing a weird trick about me. But for some reason whenever I tell people this story I always cry. I actually cried while I was typing this. My sister and I both saw the same ghost. We never realized until a decade later when I was talking about ghost stories and she mentioned she saw it too and proceeded to explain to me what she saw, which was exactly what I saw too. Well, I shouldn't have read this thread before bed. After my uncle died I went out to my car to take a drive. Have a cigarette and clear my head. As I reached for the door handle the electric locks locked and unlocked. And then did it quickly about 3 more times. This is 20 years before remote controls on your keys. It was an old beta car from the 80s. Never did it before. And it never did it again. Just that one time right after we found out. It was very odd. On several occasions I felt like I was losing my mind during a conversation because I swore I had a premonition about that exact conversation happening. I started having a panic attack one night out of nowhere. I kept repeating, "Something's wrong. I do have anxiety," but had only had one other panic attack before this day. My husband sat on the bed with me and we tried to figure out what had triggered this. The only thing we could think of is that a family member of mine was going on a trip the next day. And maybe that was making me nervous. So I made up a weird excuse to drop off coffee before they left super early the next morning. When I saw them, I felt fine. I immediately knew it wasn't connected, wished them well, and drove home. About an hour later, I get a call that a person in my family on the other side of the country died by suicide the night before. Edit. Errors. Weird dreams. Every year on the first day of spring I get the same dream of going to a camp on a train and then having to jump onto gravel or into a marsh with alligators. Then everyone gets whisked away in a tornado. Every year since I was 6. I have more dreams too, but it's even disturbing to me. In my early 20s I was working as a cook. All of a sudden my eyesight went black. I was blind for about 30 seconds. But I kept making the salad that was ordered. Then I could see again. It never happened again. Was hanging out with my friend while we were roommates. And something came up about ships in bottles. He insisted that I talked about ships in bottles frequently for several months before that point. But I honestly don't recall talking or even thinking about them really ever. His girlfriend even backed him up. I call it ship in a bottle syndrome. Deleted. As a child, like 7 years old, I was having a very hard time sleeping. I was very tired. So I crawled around my bed like a dog. And looked at the moon. I then blinked. And it turned into the sun. The only reasonable explanation is that I was so tired I fell asleep on the spot as I blinked. But I was in such an awkward position it's hard to believe. I was 5 years old. Parents went outside on the balcony to smoke some cigs. While I was sitting on the couch and laying over the side looking under the dining table, I started to hear a voice. The voice said my name and told me it would kill me. It repeated itself 3 times until my parents came back from the balcony. I live on the 3rd floor, by the way. So there is no way anybody could have entered the apartment or spoke to me through an open window. This never happened before and never happened after. It has been about 20 years since and I am baffled until this day. Thinking about it still gives me chills. Edit. Forgot to mention, I have no siblings and no one else was over that day. On a St. Patrick's Day when I was a kid I made myself a bowl of Lucky Charms. One set it down by the stove as I got some milk and when I came back it was gone. I interrogated everyone and not one entered the kitchen. I thought *ucking leprechauns stole my cereal for years. A few weeks before my grandmother had passed away, my mother had told me that her sister, my toxic aunt, had spoken to somebody. This person told her that my grandmother wouldn't have long to live, and that when she passed on in a few weeks, her soul would be in a state of unrest and pain. Obviously, I didn't believe that. A few weeks later, by the time the ambulance had arrived, it was too late for her. It could have been a coincidence. And it probably was. But something just feels so uncomfortable about the events leading up to it.